Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the quieter corridors of history. Tonight, we venture into a world where the promise of safety became the reality of imprisonment, where knowledge accumulated for centuries could vanish in a single catastrophic moment, and where the greatest luxury could transform into the most elegant form of captivity. Settle yourself comfortably as we explore four interconnected stories of human experience across time and geography. We'll begin in the cramped streets of a medieval town, where stone walls built for protection created something far more complex, a system of control that bound its inhabitants as surely as any chain. From there, we'll follow the remarkable rise of a peasant son who would reshape an entire kingdom, discovering how even the most extraordinary individual success came at prices that echo through history. Our path will then lead us to Baghdad in its golden age, to halls where the greatest minds of the medieval world gathered to preserve and advance human knowledge, until that precious accumulation of wisdom was lost forever in ways that still shape our world today. Finally, we'll enter the most magnificent palace in Europe, where the French aristocracy learned that the most beautiful prison is still a prison, and that true captivity can be disguised behind silk and gold. Each of these stories reveals something essential about the human condition: how systems meant to protect can imprison, how individual brilliance can transcend barriers while creating new ones, how the accumulated wisdom of centuries can vanish in moments, and how privilege itself can become a form of bondage. These are tales of walls both visible and invisible, of freedom and confinement, of the prices we pay for safety, knowledge, and luxury. So close your eyes, if you wish, and let these voices from the past speak to you across the centuries. Their stories are ones of struggle and accommodation, of dreams pursued and dreams constrained, of human ingenuity working both to liberate and to bind. In their experiences, perhaps, we might find echoes of our own complex relationship with the systems that shape our lives. Let us begin in a place where every dawn brought the same sounds, the same sights, and the same unbreakable routines. You wake before dawn to the sound of the church bell tolling prime, the first prayer of the day. The narrow window of your half-timbered house admits barely a sliver of gray morning light, but you don't need to see. You know exactly what awaits you outside. The same cramped streets, the same looming walls, the same faces you've seen every day for your entire life. This is your world, a medieval town in the heart of 13th century Europe, a place designed to keep dangers out, but which has become your inescapable prison. The walls that surround your town rise 30 feet into the morning mist, massive stones fitted together with such precision that not even a knife blade could slip between them. These fortifications stretch in a rough circle around your community, punctuated by only two gates: the merchant's gate facing the main road and the smaller postern gate that opens onto the river path. Both are heavily guarded, their iron-bound doors sealed shut from sunset until the morning bells ring lauds. Even then, passage requires permission from the town council, a valid reason for travel, and often payment of an exit tax that your meager earnings could never cover. Your dwelling sits wedged between two others in a row that leans inward like old men conspiring. The upper stories of the buildings almost touch across the narrow lane, blocking out much of the sky and creating a perpetual twilight that smells of smoke, unwashed bodies, and waste. The street itself is barely wide enough for two people to pass, paved with whatever stones the inhabitants could scavenge, and channeled down the center with a gutter that carries the detritus of daily life toward the river. Kitchen scraps, chamber pot contents, and the runoff from the tannery upstream create a constant flow of filth that you've learned to navigate without thinking. As a baker's apprentice, your day begins in the pre-dawn darkness, stumbling through these familiar passages toward Master Willem's shop. The routine is as fixed as the stones in the walls. Mix the dough, tend the fires, shape the loaves, and pray that today's batch will satisfy the guild inspectors who might arrive without warning to ensure that the bread meets their exacting standards. You've been bound to this trade for 7 years now. learning not just the craft of baking, but the intricate web of obligations and restrictions that govern every aspect of your working life. The Baker's Guild controls everything. What grains you may use, how much yeast is permitted, what shapes your loaves may take, and what prices you may charge. Innovation is not just discouraged but punished. When young Aldrich Streets overtried to add herbs to his bread, he was fined so heavily that his family lost their shop. When goodwife Martha attempted to sell her surplus flour directly to customers rather than through the guild, she was expelled from the trade entirely and now begs near the church steps. Your master, Willem, is not a cruel man, but he owns your labor as completely as he owns his ovens. You work from before dawn until well past sunset during busy periods, your hands growing thick with calluses and burns from the hot stone surfaces. Your wages barely cover the cost of a corner in a shared room above the cooper's workshop and 2 meals of dark bread and weak ale each day. You produce wealth with your labor, but that wealth flows upward to the guild, to your master, to the lord who owns the mills where your grain must be ground. The guild system extends its reach into every corner of the town's economic life. The weavers have their organization, as do the metalworkers, the carpenters, the merchants, and even the beggars. Each group jealously guards its privileges and responsibilities, ensuring that no one can simply change trades on a whim. You were born to a baker's family, so baker you shall remain. Your children, should you live long enough to have them, will follow the same path unless they enter the church or, for daughters, marry within the narrow confines of your social class. The gulf between your world and that of the merchant families who control the town's trade might as well be an ocean. They live in houses built of stone rather than timber, with glass windows that catch and scatter the light like captured jewels. They wear woolen cloth dyed in brilliant colors, deep blues, rich reds, vibrant greens, while you make do with a natural brown of undyed fabric. They eat meat regularly, while you consider yourself fortunate when you can afford to add a bit of pork fat to flavor your daily bread. Above even the merchants stand the nobles who own the surrounding lands. They visit your town perhaps 4 times a year, riding through your streets in carriages that gleam with brass fittings and painted designs. When they appear, every person in their path is required to kneel, heads bowed, until the procession passes. These are the men who own the mills where your grain must be processed, the ovens where certain types of bread must be baked, and ultimately, they own you. As a resident of their domains, you owe them labor service. Days when you must abandon your own work to toil in their fields, repair their roads, or maintain their fortifications. The law that governs your town exists not to ensure justice, but to maintain order and preserve the existing hierarchy. Steal a loaf of bread because your family is starving and you risk losing a hand. Speak against the Lord's taxes or the church's tithes, and you could face excommunication, a social death that means no one may trade with you, speak to you, or even provide you with food and shelter. The town court is controlled by the wealthy merchant families, and your voice carries little weight when measured against theirs. Trials by ordeal still occur for serious crimes. If accused of theft or heresy, you might be required to carry a bar of red-hot iron or plunge your hand into boiling water. If the wounds heal cleanly within 3 days, God has declared you innocent. If they fester or become infected, your guilt is proven and punishment follows swiftly. This is not justice in any sense you might recognize, but a system designed to keep you compliant and fearful, to ensure that questioning the established order seems not just dangerous, but literally blasphemous. Debt creates perhaps the most insidious form of entrapment. If you borrow money and cannot repay it, perhaps because a bad harvest has made grain expensive or because illness has prevented you from working, you don't simply lose your possessions. You can lose your freedom itself. Debt bondage allows creditors to claim your labor until the obligation is satisfied. But with interest accumulating constantly, many people spend their entire lives working for others without ever clearing what they owe. The debt becomes inherited, passed from parent to child like a family curse that no amount of honest work can lift. The church, which should offer spiritual comfort and the promise of salvation, instead becomes another instrument of control. Sunday attendance is not optional. Absence is noted and reported. The priest regularly reminds his congregation that their station in life reflects God's will, that suffering in this world leads to rewards in the next, and that questioning the social order is tantamount to questioning divine wisdom itself. Holy days, which should be times of rest and celebration, become additional burdens as you're expected to make offerings you can't afford and participate in processions that consume time you need for work. The church controls not just spiritual life, but much of the town's land and many of its most important businesses. They collect tithes, 10% of everything you produce, regardless of how little you have. They control education, ensuring that only those destined for the priesthood learn to read and write. Knowledge becomes a tool of control, keeping you dependent on others to understand contracts, legal documents, and even the religious texts that supposedly guide your salvation. Perhaps the most powerful chain that binds you to this place is psychological. This town, with all its limitations and hardships, represents safety and familiarity in a world full of unknown dangers. Beyond the walls lie forests filled with bandits and wild animals, foreign lands with strange customs and hostile populations, diseases that travelers carry from distant places. Stories circulate constantly about those who venture beyond the familiar. Merchants who never return from trading expeditions. Pilgrims who set out for holy sites and are never seen again. Young people who seek their fortunes in distant cities and send back tales of suffering that make your daily struggles seem bearable. Your identity is completely intertwined with this specific place and these particular people. You are not simply a baker. You are Willem's apprentice, the son of Thomas the baker, the boy who learned his letters from Father Benedict at St. Mary's Church. Your family has lived in this town for generations. Your grandparents are buried in the churchyard, their graves marked with stones that you visit on holy days. To leave would mean abandoning not just your livelihood, but your entire sense of who you are. The fear of the unknown keeps you as effectively imprisoned as iron bars. You have never traveled more than a day's walk from the town walls. Other places exist only as rumors and stories. London, Paris, Rome are names that might as well refer to mythical kingdoms. You have no concrete knowledge of what opportunities might exist elsewhere, what skills might be valued in different places, or how you might survive the journey to reach them. The world beyond your walls seems as vast and unknowable as the ocean, and just as dangerous to cross. Your imprisonment intensifies with the changing seasons, each bringing its own cycle of obligation and constraint. Winter locks the town in a grip of cold, darkness, and scarcity that makes any thought of departure impossible. Fuel becomes expensive, food grows scarce, and disease spreads rapidly through the crowded, poorly ventilated buildings. Many of your neighbors don't survive these months, and their deaths serve as constant reminders of how precarious your own situation truly is. Spring brings hope, but also increased obligations. The Lord's tax collectors arrive to demand payments for the privilege of living on his lands. The guild expects higher dues as trade resumes after winter's pause. Your master increases production to meet growing demand, which means longer hours and more intensive work. Summer means sweltering heat in the bakery, the constant fear that crop failures will drive grain prices beyond reach, and the knowledge that autumn will bring harvest obligations that will pull you away from your own trade. Even if you could somehow accumulate the resources necessary for departure, when would you leave? Every season brings its own dangers and duties, creating a perpetual cycle that makes escape impossible to plan or execute. The very rhythms of agricultural life that sustain the community also serve to bind its inhabitants in place. Your family ties, which should be sources of strength and comfort, become additional chains binding you to this place. Your aging parents depend on your earnings for survival. Leaving would condemn them to poverty and likely death. Your younger siblings need your help to secure apprenticeships or arrange marriages within their proper social rank. If you marry, your spouse's family will have similar claims on your loyalty and resources. The web of relationships and obligations creates a social prison more effective than any physical barrier. Children make departure even more unthinkable. They need stability, education, and opportunities to establish their own places within the community structure. Taking them into an uncertain world beyond the walls would seem like condemning them to hardship and danger. Yet staying ensures that they will face the same constrained existence you have endured, perpetuating the cycle of limitation across generations. News from the outside world arrives sporadically and filtered through multiple sources, each adding their own interpretations and distortions. You hear rumors of opportunities in distant cities, of new lands discovered across the ocean, of different ways of organizing society. But these stories seem as fantastical as tales of dragons or magic kingdoms. Without reliable information, you cannot make informed decisions about alternatives to your current situation. The few travelers who pass through your town are either merchants with their own commercial agendas or pilgrims focused on spiritual rather than practical concerns. They are not sources of useful information about how an ordinary person might build a different life elsewhere. Their very presence as outsiders makes them objects of suspicion, and their advice, if they offer any, seems questionable coming from people whose loyalties and motivations are unclear. Your ignorance of geography, languages, customs, and opportunities beyond your immediate area makes the world outside your walls seem impossibly vast and complex. This lack of knowledge becomes another bar in your prison, keeping you bound not by physical force, but by the limitations of your own understanding and imagination. You cannot seek what you cannot envision, cannot plan for contingencies you cannot foresee. The bonds that hold you in place are not just personal, but generational. Your father was trapped in this same town, following the same trade, subject to the same limitations. His father before him lived and died within these walls. The debts, obligations, and social positions that constrain you will be passed to your children like heirlooms, except that these inheritances bring only burden and restriction. The guild system ensures that your son will follow your trade, facing the same limited opportunities and systematic exploitation you have endured. Your daughter will marry within the same social circle, moving from her father's household to her husband's, but never escaping the fundamental conditions that define existence in this place. Property, tools, and skills pass down through families, but so do debts, feudal obligations, and social stigmas. A family that falls into poverty or disgrace can remain marked for generations. The systems that constrain you are designed to perpetuate themselves, ensuring that each generation remains as bound as the last. Innovation is discouraged not just economically, but socially. Those who try to change their circumstances are seen as threats to the stability that keeps the entire structure functioning. Change, when it comes, happens so slowly as to be imperceptible within a single lifetime. The cruelest aspect of your situation is the illusion of choice that masks the reality of constraint. You can choose your daily activities within the narrow bounds of guild regulations and seasonal obligations. You can choose your spouse from among the small number of eligible individuals in your social class. You can choose how to spend your few free hours on holy days. These small decisions create the feeling of agency while disguising the fact that all your truly important life choices have been made for you by circumstances, tradition, and systems beyond your control. This illusion of freedom makes your situation more bearable, but also more permanent. If you had no choices at all, you might rebel or despair to the point where action becomes necessary. Instead, you focus on the minor decisions available to you, convincing yourself that you have some control over your destiny, even as the larger patterns of your life are entirely predetermined. The town leaders, guild masters, merchant families, church officials reinforce this illusion by occasionally allowing small innovations or exceptions to established rules. These minor concessions create hope for larger changes that never actually materialize, keeping you invested in working within the existing system rather than seeking to escape or transform it. Your medieval town represents a form of prison so complete and sophisticated that it hardly seems like imprisonment at all. The walls are physical, certainly, but they are also economic, social, legal, religious, psychological, and cultural. Unlike a simple jail, where the barriers are obvious and the desire for freedom remains clear, your town disguises its prison-like nature behind promises of protection, community, and salvation. You're not just constrained by circumstances. You're trapped by a system that has evolved over centuries specifically to keep people like you in their designated places. Every institution, from the church to the guilds to the feudal hierarchy, works in concert to limit your options and redirect your energies toward maintaining the existing order rather than seeking change. The walls that were built to keep dangers out have become the barriers that keep you in. You have spent so many years within their embrace that the idea of life beyond them has become not just difficult to imagine, but genuinely frightening. This is why medieval towns were traps you couldn't escape. Not simply because leaving was physically difficult, but because the entire structure of society was designed to make you forget that escape was even a possibility. In this carefully constructed world of limitation and control, freedom exists only as an abstract concept, something that might be achieved in the afterlife through proper submission to earthly authority. The present offers only the choice between different forms of constraint, different ways of accommodating yourself to a system that requires your compliance for its continued operation. And yet, you persist. You wake each morning to the sound of the church bells. You light the fires in the bakery. You shape the dough into the prescribed forms. You find small pleasures in the warmth of fresh bread, in brief conversations with neighbors, in the changing light that filters down through the narrow spaces between buildings. You adapt, as humans always adapt, finding ways to make meaning within whatever boundaries confine you. Your life may be constrained, but it is still your life. Your choices may be limited, but they are still your choices. Your world may be small, but it is your world, familiar and comprehensible in ways that the vast unknown beyond the walls could never be. In this accommodation between desire and possibility, between dreams and reality, you discover what it means to be human in a world that offers safety only at the price of freedom. As we leave behind the cramped streets and binding walls of our medieval town, let us journey to a different kind of confinement, one that paradoxically offered the rarest of medieval possibilities, escape through exceptional ability. In the year 1081, in a small village called Cheneviers-les-Louvres, just north of Paris, a son was born to a peasant family. By every precedent of his time, this child should have lived and died in the same agricultural obscurity that had claimed his ancestors for countless generations. Instead, Suger of St. Denis would become one of the most powerful men in medieval Europe, the architect of Gothic splendor, the creator of modern France, and the kingmaker who would reshape a dynasty. His story unfolds like a dream of possibility in an age when dreams were luxuries few could afford. Yet it also reveals the profound costs of transcendence, the prices that even the most extraordinary individuals had to pay to break free from the systems that bound their contemporaries. Suger's rise illuminates both the rare cracks in medieval society's rigid structure and the new forms of imprisonment that awaited those who managed to climb through them. Young Suger's pathway out of peasant life came through the church, the only institution in medieval Europe that occasionally allowed intellect to triumph over birth. At the tender age of 10, he was sent to the Abbey School of St. Denis, a royal monastery whose very stones whispered of power and possibility. This was not an act of charity. Peasant families sometimes sacrificed everything to educate a promising son, hoping against hope that one might rise high enough to lift an entire lineage from poverty's grip. The Abbey of St. Denis was no ordinary religious house. It served as the sacred burial ground of French kings, keeper of the royal regalia, and spiritual heart of the emerging French monarchy. Walking its corridors meant breathing the same air as the greatest nobles of the realm. For a peasant boy whose world had been measured in furrows and seasons, simply entering such a place was like stepping into a realm of magic. At St. Denis, young Suger encountered something almost unprecedented in medieval society, a classroom where birth mattered less than brilliance. Here, the future Louis VI of France sat beside the peasant boy, both struggling with Latin grammar and theological disputation. Their friendship, forged over shared lessons and youthful pranks, would eventually reshape the political landscape of Europe. In a world where social boundaries seemed as fixed as the stars, this companionship between prince and peasant hinted at possibilities that existed nowhere else. Suger proved exceptional from his earliest days. His memory was extraordinary. He could recite entire books of scripture after hearing them only once. His logical mind grasped complex theological arguments that left his noble classmates confused and struggling. Most crucially, he understood instinctively how to navigate the treacherous currents of abbey politics, making allies while avoiding enemies, supporting the right causes at precisely the right moments. These skills would serve him well in arenas far beyond the monastery walls. After completing his education, Suger took monastic vows and began his careful ascent through the abbey's hierarchy. But his real education was just beginning. St. Denis existed at the center of vast networks that connected every major power center in medieval Europe. Manuscripts arrived from Constantinople, carrying the wisdom of Byzantine scholars. Philosophers who had studied Islamic texts in Spanish libraries came to debate questions that pushed the boundaries of Christian thought. Pilgrims brought news from Jerusalem, merchants shared intelligence from distant markets, and diplomats whispered secrets that could topple kingdoms. Suger mastered these networks with the instinctive skill of a born diplomat. He corresponded with abbots across England, Germany, and Italy, building relationships that transcended political boundaries. He studied the architectural innovations being pioneered in Norman churches, understanding how physical structures could embody and project spiritual and political authority. Most importantly, he began to comprehend how royal power actually functioned behind its ceremonial facade. Medieval kingship balanced on a knife's edge between competing forces that could destroy a monarch who failed to manage them skillfully. The king needed the support of great nobles who controlled vast territories and maintained private armies. He required the blessing of the church to legitimize his rule in the eyes of his subjects. He depended on the loyalty of growing towns and emerging merchant guilds to generate the wealth necessary for effective government. Most delicately, he had to manage relationships with other kings who might be allies today and enemies tomorrow, their loyalties shifting with the changing tides of advantage and opportunity. Suger observed as his childhood friend Louis struggled with these challenges after ascending to the throne as Louis VI. The young king was a capable warrior, but often a poor politician, acting on impulse rather than calculation, alienating potential allies through thoughtless pride, creating problems that careful diplomacy might have avoided. Repeatedly, Suger found himself smoothing over diplomatic disasters, negotiating compromises between hostile nobles, finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible political puzzles. In 1122, at the age of 41, Suger was elected abbot of St. Denis. This position automatically made him one of the most powerful men in France. But Suger possessed ambitions that extended far beyond personal advancement. He envisioned a complete transformation of both the monarchy and the kingdom, a renovation that would require all his accumulated knowledge, influence, and political genius to achieve. Suger's first great innovation was architectural, but it served purposes far beyond aesthetic beauty. The ancient abbey church of St. Denis was dark, cramped, and entirely inadequate for the growing importance of the French monarchy. Suger began planning a complete reconstruction that would incorporate the most advanced architectural techniques available anywhere in Europe. His new church would feature unprecedented height, enormous windows filled with jewel-like colored glass, and an overall sense of lightness and transcendence that no building had ever achieved. This architectural revolution served profound political purposes. Suger understood that royal power needed to be made visible and overwhelming to those who witnessed it. His soaring church would create a space where kings could be crowned in settings that emphasized their divine appointment. The magnificent colored glass windows would tell the story of French royal history, linking current monarchs to the heroes and saints of the past. Every element would reinforce the message that opposition to the king constituted opposition to God himself. The construction project functioned as something far more significant than mere building. It was a massive economic stimulus that attracted craftsmen, artists, and laborers from across Europe. These workers brought new techniques and created networks of knowledge that would spread Suger's innovations to cathedrals throughout France and beyond. The abbot was launching an artistic revolution that would define medieval culture for centuries to come, while simultaneously strengthening the economic foundations of royal power. When Louis VI died in 1137, his son Louis VII inherited the throne at the age of 17. The young king was pious, well-intentioned, and completely unprepared for the brutal realities of medieval politics. Without Suger's guidance, the kingdom might well have collapsed within a few years, torn apart by ambitious nobles who would have seen opportunity in the monarch's inexperience. Suger became the young king's chief advisor, regent during his absences, and the real power operating behind the throne. When Louis VII announced his intention to join the Second Crusade, Suger recognized both opportunity and potential catastrophe. The crusade would remove the king from France for years, leaving the kingdom vulnerable to internal rebellion and external invasion. Yet opposing the king's pious intentions could destroy Suger's influence entirely, marking him as an enemy of both royal will and divine purpose. Suger's solution demonstrated the political genius that had carried him from peasant origins to the heights of power. He publicly supported the crusade while privately organizing the kingdom's defense during the king's absence. He negotiated agreements with potential rebels, secured the borders against German and English threats, and established administrative systems capable of functioning effectively without direct royal oversight. When Louis VII departed for the Holy Land in 1147, he left behind a kingdom more stable and better organized than when he had inherited it. The king's absence also provided Suger with opportunities to implement reforms that might have faced royal resistance. He standardized legal procedures across the realm, improved tax collection systems, and strengthened the royal bureaucracy with educated clerks who could maintain governmental continuity regardless of who occupied the throne. When Louis VII returned from his failed crusade in 1149, he discovered his kingdom more prosperous and powerful than he had left it, his position as monarch more secure than any French king had enjoyed in generations. Perhaps Suger's greatest political challenge emerged from an unexpected source: Louis VII's wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor brought to her marriage the largest duchy in France, territory that doubled the kingdom's size and wealth. But she also brought a fierce independence, political ambitions entirely her own, and complete disdain for the submissive role expected of medieval queens. Her strong will and political intelligence made her both an invaluable asset and a constant source of potential disaster. Eleanor had accompanied Louis on the Second Crusade, scandalizing Europe with her active participation in military planning and her rumored romantic adventures with various nobles and even with her own uncle, Raymond of Antioch. Her marriage to Louis VII was deteriorating rapidly, and divorce seemed increasingly inevitable. For Suger, this personal drama represented a political catastrophe of the first order. Losing Eleanor would mean losing Aquitaine, effectively having the kingdom's territory and destroying decades of careful territorial expansion. Suger attempted to mediate between the royal couple with all his considerable diplomatic skills. He arranged reconciliation meetings, negotiated compromises on their most contentious disputes, and even sought papal intervention to preserve the marriage. But Eleanor's will proved stronger than his powers of persuasion, and in 1152 the marriage was annulled on grounds of consanguinity. The consequences unfolded exactly as Suger had feared. Eleanor immediately married Henry Plantagenet, who became King Henry II of England just 2 years later. Suddenly, the English king controlled more territory within France than the French king himself. Suger's careful work of decades seemed to have been undone by a single romantic disaster that transformed the balance of European power. Faced with this territorial catastrophe, Suger demonstrated why contemporaries considered him the most capable administrator of his age. Instead of despairing over lost lands, he focused his energies on maximizing the efficiency and resources of the territory that remained under French control. His administrative reforms would create the foundational structures of modern French government and establish precedents that would influence European governance for centuries. Suger standardized the royal court system, ensuring that justice would be administered according to consistent principles rather than the varying whims of local customs or noble preferences. He created a permanent royal treasury, ending the medieval practice of kings carrying their wealth with them as they traveled from place to place. Most importantly, he established a professional bureaucracy of educated clerks who could manage the business of government regardless of political changes or royal personalities. These innovations required new sources of revenue that went far beyond traditional feudal obligations. Suger negotiated agreements with merchant guilds that provided them with royal protection for their trade routes in exchange for regular monetary payments to the royal treasury. He encouraged urban growth by granting town charters that guaranteed municipal independence from local nobles in return for direct payments to the crown. He even began experimenting with new forms of taxation that would eventually evolve into the comprehensive revenue systems of later French monarchs. The abbot also revolutionized military organization in ways that would reshape European warfare. Instead of relying entirely on feudal levies that could only be summoned for limited periods, he began maintaining permanent garrisons in key fortifications throughout the realm. He established sophisticated supply systems capable of supporting extended military campaigns. Most innovatively, he created military engineering corps with the technical knowledge necessary to construct and maintain the complex siege equipment that was transforming medieval warfare. Beyond his political and administrative innovations, Suger understood that lasting royal authority required comprehensive cultural transformation. He commissioned historical chronicles that presented French history as a continuous narrative of divinely appointed monarchs, each building upon the achievements of his predecessors. He patronized poets and musicians who celebrated royal achievements in vernacular French rather than Latin, making royal glory accessible to broader populations. Most significantly, he promoted the development of French literature that would create shared cultural identity, transcending local loyalties and regional differences. The Abbey of St. Denis became Europe's premier center for manuscript production and artistic innovation under Suger's guidance. Scribes worked continuously to copy classical texts alongside contemporary works, ensuring that ancient wisdom would be preserved while new intellectual developments flourished. Artists experimented with techniques that would influence European aesthetic development for centuries. Scholars engaged in theological and philosophical debates that helped shape medieval intellectual traditions. Suger's Gothic architectural innovations spread rapidly across Europe, but they carried distinctly French characteristics that proclaimed not just divine glory, but the sophistication and power of French civilization. Foreign visitors to the magnificent cathedrals built in his style could not help but be impressed by the kingdom's evident wealth, artistic achievement, and divine favor. Architecture became a form of diplomacy, projecting French cultural superiority across political boundaries. The abbot also actively promoted French as a language of literature and learning. While Latin remained the language of international diplomacy and scholarly discourse, French began appearing in legal documents, commercial contracts, and artistic works. This linguistic development proved crucial for creating the unified national identity that would sustain French power through future centuries of political challenge and military conflict. Suger's innovations demanded unprecedented financial resources that stretched traditional medieval governmental capabilities to their limits. His vision of centralized royal authority, professional administrative systems, and permanent military forces required entirely new approaches to royal finance that would revolutionize European economic relationships. His solutions involved careful cultivation of commercial partnerships that created networks of individuals and institutions with vested interests in royal success. merchants who depended on royal protection for their expanding trade networks, bankers who held increasing amounts of royal debt, and investors who purchased government bonds all became stakeholders in the monarchy's continued stability and growth. Suger also transformed agricultural administration in ways that would drive French economic expansion for generations. He encouraged the development of new farming techniques that dramatically increased productivity, supported extensive forest clearing projects that brought new lands under cultivation, and promoted the growth of market towns where agricultural surplus could be efficiently converted into royal revenues. As abbot of St. Denis and chief advisor to two successive kings, Suger found himself at the very center of European international relations. Medieval diplomacy required constant attention to shifting alliances, competing territorial claims, and evolving threats that could emerge from any direction. Suger proved masterful at this complex political game, successfully maintaining French interests while avoiding the catastrophic wars that devastated other kingdoms. His relationship with the papacy demanded particularly delicate handling. The church claimed theoretical superiority over all secular rulers, but also depended heavily on royal support for its temporal power and territorial holdings. Suger navigated these potentially explosive competing claims by supporting papal spiritual authority while firmly insisting on royal independence in political matters. His diplomatic skills helped prevent the devastating conflicts between church and state that tore apart Germany and England during this same period. Suger's dealings with the Holy Roman Empire required equal diplomatic finesse. German emperors claimed authority over all European monarchs, while French kings insisted on complete independence from imperial control. Suger avoided direct confrontation that might have provoked military conflict while quietly building alliance networks that would contain potential German expansion. His careful policies helped establish the balance of power that would characterize European international relations for centuries. Perhaps most challenging of all, Suger had to manage the growing threat posed by England after Eleanor's remarriage created the Angevin Empire. Henry II's vast territorial holdings within France created an impossible diplomatic situation that threatened the very existence of French royal authority. Suger's response involved patient coalition building, strategic support for Henry's enemies, and careful preparation for the longer conflict he knew was inevitable. Throughout his extraordinary political career, Suger remained an active scholar and intellectual innovator whose writings would influence European thought for centuries. His works on government theory, theological questions, and aesthetic philosophy established new standards for political analysis and institutional history. His architectural theories revolutionized building design across the entire continent. Suger's most significant intellectual contribution may have been his masterful synthesis of classical learning with contemporary political experience. He studied ancient Roman administrative techniques and adapted them skillfully to medieval conditions and requirements. He incorporated Islamic mathematical and scientific knowledge that had reached Europe through Spanish translations. Most importantly, he demonstrated how theoretical learning could be applied effectively to practical political problems that had previously seemed intractable. His educational reforms at St. Denis created institutional models that would be copied by schools throughout Europe. Suger insisted that students master both classical literature and contemporary vernacular languages, both abstract theological disputation and practical administrative skills. His educational graduates went on to serve in governments across Europe, spreading his innovations while maintaining France's intellectual influence far beyond its political boundaries. In his final years, Suger faced the enormous challenge of ensuring that his innovations would survive his inevitable death. He had transformed both the French monarchy and the French kingdom, but much of this transformation depended on his personal authority and the diplomatic relationships he had carefully cultivated over decades. Creating lasting institutional changes required systematic preparation and gradual transition of power to carefully chosen successors. Suger's solution involved comprehensive training programs for new generations of administrators and political advisors. He He established schools specifically designed to produce the educated clerks necessary for professional government service. He wrote detailed operational manuals describing his administrative innovations in ways that future officials could understand and implement. Most importantly, he personally mentored promising young men who would carry his policies and approaches forward into succeeding generations. The abbot also worked tirelessly to ensure completion of his architectural projects, particularly the magnificent new abbey church that would serve as the spiritual center of French royal authority. He endowed substantial funds for the building's perpetual maintenance and established institutional traditions that would preserve its role as the Sacred Heart of French monarchy for centuries to come. When Suger died in 1151 at the age of 70, he left behind a kingdom utterly transformed from what he had inherited. France had evolved from a loose collection of feuding territories into a unified state, with professional administration, standardized legal systems, and significant international influence. The Gothic architectural style he had pioneered was spreading across Europe like a beautiful contagion. The cultural and intellectual innovations he had promoted were reshaping medieval civilization in ways that would endure for centuries. Suger's remarkable success in strengthening French monarchy created precedents and expectations that would shape European political development for generations. His administrative innovations demonstrated conclusively that centralized government could operate far more effectively than feudal fragmentation, inspiring monarchs throughout Europe to attempt similar consolidations of power. His diplomatic techniques became standard practices in international relations. However, Suger's innovations also inadvertently created new forms of political conflict that would plague future generations. The strong monarchy he had constructed inevitably came into conflict with traditional noble independence, leading to centuries of civil warfare. His territorial losses to England created the fundamental conditions that would eventually produce the devastating Hundred Years' War. His financial innovations created new forms of economic dependency and social tension that would generate persistent political instability. Perhaps most significantly, Suger's dramatic demonstration that exceptional talent could occasionally triumph over humble birth inspired countless ambitious individuals to seek advancement through church service, government positions, or commercial success. This limited but real social mobility began the gradual transformation of European society from completely rigid hierarchy toward the more fluid class structures that would eventually characterize modern civilization. Suger of St. Denis represents one of medieval Europe's most remarkable success stories. A peasant's son who rose to shape the destiny of nations through pure intellectual ability and political genius. His extraordinary career reveals both the rare possibilities and the severe limitations that characterized medieval society. While social mobility remained extremely unusual, it was not entirely impossible for truly exceptional individuals who found the right opportunities and possessed the skills to exploit them effectively. More importantly, Suger's life demonstrates how individual brilliance could interact with favorable historical circumstances to produce lasting institutional changes that would influence the development of entire civilizations. His architectural innovations created the Gothic style that would define European aesthetic sensibility for centuries. His administrative reforms established governmental structures that would evolve into modern state systems. His diplomatic achievements preserved French independence during crucial decades when the kingdom might easily have been absorbed by more powerful neighbors. Yet Suger's story also reveals the profound personal costs that medieval advancement demanded even from its most successful practitioners. His rise required the complete abandonment of family connections and regional identity, the dedication of his entire life to institutional service rather than personal relationships, and constant navigation of political dangers that could have destroyed him at any moment. His achievements came at the price of individual freedom, personal happiness, and any life outside the demanding corridors of power. The peasant boy from Chennevières-les-Louvres had indeed escaped the economic and social trap that confined his contemporaries to agricultural labor and village life. But his escape led him into a different kind of prison, one constructed from political necessity, diplomatic obligation, and the relentless demands of institutional responsibility. His success transformed a kingdom and influenced the development of European civilization, but it also demonstrated exactly why such dramatic social transformations remain so extraordinarily rare in the medieval world. In Suger's remarkable rise and the constraints it ultimately imposed, we see reflected the fundamental paradoxes of human achievement in any age. How success can become its own form of bondage, how the exercise of power demands the surrender of personal autonomy, and how even the most extraordinary individuals must operate within systems that limit their possibilities even as they provide opportunities for greatness. From the political intrigues of medieval France, let us journey eastward across time and space to a different kind of palace, one built not from stone and gold, but from knowledge itself. Picture, if you can, a library so vast that its catalog alone filled 40 volumes. Envision halls where scholars from across the known world gather to debate in Arabic, Persian, Greek, Sanskrit, and Chinese, their voices weaving together the intellectual traditions of civilizations separated by thousands of miles and centuries of development. This was the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the greatest repository of human learning that the medieval world had ever seen. Within its walls, the accumulated knowledge of humanity found sanctuary. Ancient Greek philosophy rescued from oblivion, Indian mathematical innovations that would transform human calculation, Persian astronomical observations that mapped the heavens with unprecedented precision, Chinese technological marvels that promised to revolutionize daily life. And then, in February 1258, it all vanished. When the Mongol armies of Hulagu Khan captured Baghdad, they threw the library's precious manuscripts into the Tigris River in such quantities that witnesses claimed the water ran black with ink for days. Centuries of painstaking scholarly work, translations that had preserved ancient wisdom, original research that had advanced every field of human inquiry, scientific instruments that had revealed the secrets of the cosmos, all disappeared in an orgy of destruction that set back human civilization in ways we are only beginning to understand. The story of the House of Wisdom represents one of history's greatest mysteries and most profound tragedies. How did medieval Baghdad become the intellectual center of the world? What irreplaceable treasures of knowledge were lost forever in that catastrophic destruction? And why has this disaster, which may represent the greatest intellectual catastrophe in human history, remained largely unknown to the broader currents of historical memory? The story begins in the 8th century, when the Abbasid Caliphate established their magnificent capital at Baghdad, positioning it strategically between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers where the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia had once flourished. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid, whose name would be immortalized in the tales of the Arabian Nights, envisioned his city as far more than a mere political center. He dreamed of creating a new Alexandria, a place where all human knowledge would be gathered, preserved, and advanced regardless of its origin or the circumstances of its creation. Al-Rashid's vision emerged from both practical necessity and profound philosophical conviction. The Islamic Empire stretched from the olive groves of Spain to the Silk Roads of Central Asia, encompassing territories where Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese civilizations had developed sophisticated intellectual traditions over millennia. Rather than simply conquering these lands and extracting their material wealth, Islamic rulers recognized that knowledge itself represented the greatest treasure any conquest could yield. The Caliph established the House of Wisdom around 830 CE during the reign of his son Al-Mamun, but this was not simply a library in any sense we might recognize today. It functioned simultaneously as a comprehensive research institute, an international translation center, a sophisticated astronomical observatory, and an advanced academy where the greatest minds of the age could pursue their investigations without concern for immediate practical applications or political orthodoxy. Scholars received generous stipends that allowed them to dedicate their entire attention to research and learning. Translators were paid the weight of their completed manuscripts in gold, an incentive system that encouraged both quantity and quality in their crucial work. The Caliph himself regularly participated in the learned debates that echoed through the institution's halls, demonstrating that the pursuit of knowledge enjoyed the highest possible political support and social prestige. The House of Wisdom initially focused its energies on translation, but this was translation of a scope and ambition that had never been attempted in human history. Islamic scholars had recognized that they had inherited conquered territories where the intellectual achievements of multiple civilizations were preserved in manuscripts that might represent the only surviving copies of irreplaceable works. Rather than allowing this accumulated wisdom to disappear through neglect or deliberate destruction, they launched the most comprehensive preservation project ever undertaken. The translation effort centered particularly on Greek texts, many of which existed nowhere else in the world. The decline of the Byzantine Empire and the various disasters that had befallen earlier libraries meant that many classical works survived only in single manuscripts held in remote monasteries or private collections. Islamic translators, often working from these unique copies, raced to preserve this heritage before it could vanish forever through war, fire, flood, or simple decay. Hunayn ibn Ishaq led this monumental effort, directing teams of translators who worked not just in Greek and Arabic, but in Syriac, Persian, and other languages that served as bridges between different intellectual traditions. These scholars didn't simply translate word for word, but sought to understand and convey the deeper meanings of complex philosophical and scientific concepts. Their Arabic versions of works by Aristotle, Plato, Galen, and Ptolemy often became more accurate and complete than any Greek manuscripts that survived into the modern era. Persian texts received equally careful attention from the house's translation teams. The administrative traditions of the Sassanid Empire, which had governed much of the Middle East before the Islamic conquest, represented centuries of accumulated governmental wisdom. Zoroastrian astronomical observations, recorded over generations by temple priests, contained data about celestial movements that existed nowhere else. Persian literary treasures, epic poems, moral tales, historical chronicles, preserved cultural memories that would otherwise have been lost to political upheaval and social change. Indian mathematics and astronomy presented particular challenges and extraordinary opportunities for the translation project. Indian scholars had developed advanced algebraic techniques, decimal notation systems, and astronomical calculation methods that surpassed anything known in the Mediterranean world. Islamic translators didn't simply preserve these innovations. They integrated them with Greek geometric methods and Persian computational techniques, creating new synthetic approaches that advanced mathematical knowledge centuries beyond its previous development. Chinese texts arrived along the Silk Road trade routes, often carried by merchants or diplomatic missions whose members barely understood the significance of the documents they transported. Works on medicine that described surgical techniques unknown in Western traditions, technological treatises that explain mechanical principles not yet discovered in other cultures, and natural philosophy texts that offered different ways of understanding the physical world were all painstakingly decoded by scholars who had to master entirely new linguistic and conceptual systems. The papermaking techniques that reached Baghdad from China revolutionized the entire translation enterprise by making book production economically feasible on an unprecedented scale. Instead of relying on expensive parchment or papyrus, the House of Wisdom could produce affordable books in quantities that allowed knowledge to spread rapidly throughout the Islamic world and beyond. While the preservation of ancient knowledge represented a crucial achievement, the House of Wisdom's greatest contribution to human civilization lay in the original research conducted by its scholars. These men didn't simply copy and translate the works of earlier thinkers. They questioned established doctrines, tested theoretical claims through systematic observation, and advanced every field of human knowledge through innovations that would influence intellectual development for centuries. Al-Khwarizmi, working in a house's mathematical division, developed algebra as a distinct mathematical discipline that could solve practical problems as well as abstract theoretical puzzles. His treatise, Al-Kitab al-Muqtasar fi Hizb al-Jabr wal Muqabala, The compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing gave algebra its name and established systematic methods that remain fundamental to the field today. But Al-Khwarizmi went far beyond pure mathematical theory, applying algebraic techniques to practical problems of inheritance law, commercial calculation, and astronomical prediction. The Banu Musa brothers, three remarkable mechanical engineers supported by the house's resources, created automated devices that wouldn't be matched in complexity until the European Renaissance. Their programmable mechanical flute player could perform complex musical compositions without human intervention. Their self-filling oil lamps used sophisticated feedback mechanisms to maintain consistent illumination. Their elaborate water clocks incorporated gear systems and hydraulic principles that anticipated much later developments in precision timekeeping. Their book of ingenious mechanical devices contained designs so advanced that some weren't successfully reproduced until the industrial age. Al-Razi, perhaps the greatest physician of his era, conducted systematic medical observations and controlled experiments that established clinical methodology centuries before similar approaches appeared in European medicine. His detailed descriptions of smallpox and measles were so accurate that they remained standard medical references well into the modern period. Working in the house's medical facilities, he developed techniques for surgical anesthesia, created the first systematic medical case histories, and established ethical guidelines for medical research that influenced Islamic medical practice for centuries. The House of Wisdom's astronomical observatory represented medieval science at its most sophisticated level of development. Built on the institution's roof and equipped with instruments for precise celestial observation that surpassed anything available in contemporary Europe or China, it served as the center for astronomical research that would reshape humanity's understanding of the cosmos while providing mathematical foundations for later developments in physics and navigation. Al-Battani, working with the observatory's advanced instruments, produced astronomical measurements of unprecedented accuracy. His determination of the solar year's length differed from the true value by only 2 minutes, a precision not achieved in Europe until the Renaissance. His observations of planetary motions, conducted systematically over several decades, revealed significant discrepancies in Ptolemaic astronomical theory that would eventually contribute to the development of heliocentric models of the solar system. The observatory's most ambitious project involved determining the Earth's circumference through coordinated measurements at different latitudes. Teams of astronomers traveled to locations precisely measured degrees apart, using advanced surveying techniques to calculate the planet's actual size. Their result proved remarkably accurate and demonstrated a level of international scientific cooperation that wouldn't be achieved again until the modern era. Star catalogs compiled at the House of Wisdom contained detailed observations of stellar positions, brightness variations, and previously unknown celestial phenomena. These comprehensive records preserved observations from Persian, Indian, and Chinese sources while adding original discoveries that filled crucial gaps in humanity's knowledge of the night sky. Many star names still used by modern astronomers derive directly from the Arabic terminology developed in these systematic catalogs. The House of Wisdom became the center of an extraordinary philosophical movement that sought to reconcile Greek rational philosophy with Islamic theological doctrine. This wasn't merely an academic exercise conducted for intellectual satisfaction. It represented a serious attempt to create a comprehensive worldview that could unite diverse populations under Islamic rule while maintaining genuine intellectual integrity and rigorous logical standards. Al-Kindi, often called the father of Islamic philosophy, pioneered this ambitious synthesis. Working with Greek philosophical texts that had been preserved nowhere else, he developed sophisticated arguments for the compatibility of Aristotelian logic with Quranic revelation. His methodological approaches influenced both Islamic and Christian scholastic traditions, providing analytical frameworks that would shape medieval philosophy across religious and cultural boundaries for centuries. The Mu'tazila school, which centered much of its activity at the House of Wisdom, developed elegant theological arguments that emphasize human free will, divine justice, and the fundamentally rational nature of religious truth. Their debates with Orthodox Muslim theologians created a rich literature of philosophical argumentation that advanced logical methodology and ethical theory throughout the medieval world. Although their specific theological conclusions were eventually rejected by Islamic orthodoxy, their argumentative techniques and analytical methods continued to influence philosophical development across cultural boundaries. Al-Farabi, working within the house's philosophical division, created comprehensive political philosophy that successfully integrated Platonic idealism with Islamic legal theory and governmental practice. His description of the perfect state outlined ideal forms of government that would combine philosophical wisdom with religious guidance, providing theoretical foundations for Islamic political thought that would influence both Islamic and Christian political philosophy for generations. The House of Wisdom's medical research established standards of scientific rigor and clinical methodology that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. Islamic physicians, working with translated Greek medical texts supplemented by their own systematic clinical observations, developed comprehensive approaches to diagnosis, treatment, and medical education that transformed healthcare throughout the medieval world. Al-Razi's revolutionary clinical methodology emphasized careful observation of disease symptoms, systematic recording of individual case histories, and controlled testing of different treatments to determine their relative effectiveness. His hospital in Baghdad became a model for medical institutions throughout the Islamic world, establishing detailed protocols for patient care, medical education, and pharmaceutical research that influenced medical practice for centuries after his death. The house supported extensive pharmaceutical research, with teams of scholars systematically cataloging the medical properties of plants, minerals, and animal products gathered from across the known world. Their comprehensive pharmaceutical texts described hundreds of drugs unknown to traditional Greek medicine, often derived from Indian, Chinese, or Persian sources that had never before been systematically studied. These detailed compilations became standard medical references throughout medieval Europe and continued to influence medical practice well into the modern era. Surgical techniques developed at the House of Wisdom advanced far beyond anything available in contemporary European medicine. Islamic surgeons, building upon translated Greek medical texts while incorporating their own innovations and observations, developed sophisticated procedures for cataract removal, kidney stone extraction, and complex orthopedic surgeries. Their detailed surgical manuals, illustrated with precise anatomical diagrams, provided comprehensive guides to procedures that wouldn't be attempted in European medical practice for centuries. The mathematical work conducted at the House of Wisdom revolutionized human computational abilities and established foundational principles for later scientific development. Islamic mathematicians, successfully combining Greek geometric methods with Indian algebraic techniques, created entirely new mathematical disciplines while solving theoretical problems that had puzzled scholars for generations. The systematic adoption of Indian decimal notation and the concept of zero revolutionized calculation throughout the Islamic world and, eventually, medieval Europe. Al-Khwarizmi's clear presentation of these techniques made complex mathematical operations accessible to merchants, government administrators, and scholars who had previously been severely limited by cumbersome Roman numeration systems that made advanced calculation nearly impossible. Trigonometry emerged as a distinct mathematical discipline through research conducted at the House of Wisdom. Islamic mathematicians, motivated by practical applications in astronomy and geography, developed comprehensive trigonometric methods that far surpassed the geometric techniques available to Greek mathematicians. Their detailed trigonometric tables and sophisticated computational methods remained standard references for mathematical work throughout the medieval period and beyond. Advanced geometric research at the house approached mathematical concepts that wouldn't be fully developed until modern times. Islamic mathematicians investigated non-Euclidean geometric possibilities, worked with infinite series, and explored advanced algebraic geometry that demonstrated mathematical sophistication matching much later historical periods. Their geometric methods found immediate practical applications in architecture, astronomy, and engineering that produced technological achievements centuries ahead of contemporary developments elsewhere. The House of Wisdom served as a center for technological innovation that produced mechanical devices, chemical processes, and engineering solutions of remarkable sophistication. The practical orientation that characterized Islamic scholarship encouraged systematic application of theoretical knowledge to concrete problems, resulting in technological advances that improved daily life throughout the medieval world while pointing toward future possibilities. The Banu Musa brothers' mechanical innovations demonstrated principles of automation and feedback control that anticipated fundamental concepts of modern engineering. Their self-regulating water clocks used sophisticated feedback mechanisms to maintain accurate time keeping regardless of seasonal variations in water pressure or temperature. Their programmable musical devices could perform complex compositions automatically, demonstrating early applications of what would later be recognized as cybernetic principles of control and communication. Chemical research conducted at the house established alchemy as a systematic experimental science rather than a collection of mystical practices. Jabir ibn Hayyan, working in the institution's well-equipped chemical laboratories, developed advanced techniques for distillation, crystallization, and chemical synthesis that pushed pharmaceutical and industrial chemistry centuries beyond previous achievements. His systematic classification of chemical substances and detailed description of chemical reactions provided theoretical frameworks that influenced chemical research throughout the medieval period and into the modern era. Optical research at the house produced innovations in lens grinding, mirror construction, and theoretical optics that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the Renaissance. Ibn al-Haytham's systematic experiments with light, reflection, and refraction established rigorous scientific methodology while contributing to practical developments in astronomy, medicine, and mechanical technology that had immediate applications throughout the Islamic world. The House of Wisdom became the undisputed center of medieval geography, producing maps, travel accounts, and geographical theories that shaped humanity's understanding of the planet for centuries. Islamic geographers, with access to information from the vast Islamic empire, supplemented by intelligence from trading networks that reached into Asia and Africa, created the most accurate and comprehensive geographical knowledge available to the medieval world. Al-Idrisi, working with geographical materials preserved and organized at the house, produced the most detailed and accurate world map of the medieval period. His magnificent Tabula Rogeriana combined information from Greek sources, contemporary Arabic accounts, and systematic contemporary observations to create a geographical representation that surpassed anything available in European scholarly circles. His accompanying geographical descriptions provided detailed accounts of regions from Spain to China, preserving invaluable information about many areas that would otherwise remain unknown to historical investigation. The house actively supported extensive travel and systematic exploration, sponsoring scholarly expeditions that journeyed throughout the known world to gather geographical, cultural, and scientific information. These carefully planned intellectual expeditions produced detailed accounts of distant lands, precise measurements of geographical features, and systematic observations of cultural practices that preserve invaluable historical records for future scholarly investigation. Mathematical geography developed at the house established sophisticated techniques for map projection, accurate distance calculation, and precise coordinate systems that advanced cartographic accuracy throughout the medieval world. Islamic geographers developed innovative methods for representing the spherical Earth on flat surfaces, calculated remarkably accurate distances between distant cities, and created comprehensive coordinate systems that enabled precise geographical reference and navigation. Beyond its scientific and philosophical achievements, the House of Wisdom preserved and actively promoted literary traditions from across the known world. This comprehensive cultural preservation proved crucial for maintaining the diverse cultural identities of populations within the Islamic Empire, while simultaneously fostering new forms of literary expression that would influence world literature for centuries to come. Persian poetry, threatened by political upheavals and gradual linguistic changes, found secure refuge in the house's extensive literary collections. Scholars systematically copied and carefully preserved classical Persian works, while actively encouraging contemporary poets to develop innovative forms and explore new thematic possibilities. This dedicated preservation effort maintained Persian literary traditions through centuries of political instability and cultural transformation that might otherwise have resulted in irreparable losses. Arabic literature flourished under the house's generous patronage, with poets and prose writers developing sophisticated literary forms that skillfully combined traditional Arabic themes with influences drawn from Persian, Greek, and other cultural traditions. The literary innovations directly supported by the house's resources influenced Arabic literature throughout the medieval period, while contributing to the development of new literary genres that would eventually spread throughout European literary culture. Translation of literary works from multiple languages created unprecedented opportunities for cross-cultural literary influence that produced entirely new synthetic literary forms. Arabic adaptations of Persian narrative traditions, creative interpretations of Greek dramatic themes, and innovative treatments of Indian moral tales created new literary genres that influenced storytelling traditions throughout the medieval world, while preserving cultural elements that might otherwise have been lost to historical change. The House of Wisdom's extraordinary intellectual openness and commitment to rational inquiry eventually brought it into increasingly serious conflict with conservative religious authorities who viewed its activities as potential threats to Islamic orthodoxy. The philosophical debates it fostered, the scientific methodologies it promoted, and the cultural diversity it celebrated gradually came to be seen by Orthodox religious leaders as dangerous challenges to established religious doctrine rather than valuable contributions to Islamic civilization. The Mina, or Religious Inquisition, of the early 9th century marked the beginning of sustained official pressure on the house's intellectual freedom and institutional autonomy. Scholars were required to affirm specific theological positions that might conflict with their research findings. Philosophical investigations became subject to religious oversight that could halt promising lines of inquiry, and the institution's traditional autonomy was gradually reduced through administrative changes that subordinated intellectual considerations to political and religious requirements. Economic pressures also contributed significantly to the house's gradual decline from its earlier prominence. The massive translation projects that had built its incomparable collections required enormous financial resources that later caliphs proved increasingly reluctant to provide, particularly when military pressures from Byzantine, Crusader, and other enemies demanded growing portions of the caliphate's available resources for immediate defense rather than long-term intellectual investment. Internal political instability further undermined the house's position as the center of Islamic intellectual life. As the unified Abbasid Caliphate gradually fragmented into competing successor states, the coordinated scholarly community that had flourished under centralized patronage and political stability began to disperse across the Islamic world. Prominent scholars migrated to regional courts that offered better opportunities, taking their specialized knowledge and personal manuscript collections with them, gradually weakening the house's position as the unrivaled center of Islamic learning. The Mongol conquest of Baghdad in February 1258 represented not just a political and military disaster, but an intellectual catastrophe of absolutely unprecedented proportions in human history. Hulagu Khan's armies, following standard Mongol military doctrine designed to eliminate any potential centers of resistance, identified the House of Wisdom as a dangerous source of unified Islamic identity that had to be completely destroyed to prevent future rebellions against Mongol rule. The systematic destruction that followed went far beyond the requirements of simple military conquest. Mongol forces deliberately and methodically targeted the house's irreplaceable collections, throwing precious manuscripts into the Tigris River with such devastating thoroughness that multiple witnesses described the water running black with dissolved ink for days after the conquest. Sophisticated astronomical instruments were melted down for their metal content without regard for their scientific value. Advanced laboratory equipment was systematically destroyed, and the accumulated intellectual treasures of centuries vanished completely in a matter of days. The human cost of the destruction proved equally catastrophic for the future of Islamic intellectual development. Leading scholars were killed outright or scattered across vast distances. The institutional knowledge necessary to maintain the house's complex research programs was permanently lost, and the international networks that had connected Islamic intellectual centers throughout the medieval world were completely severed. Centuries of accumulated expertise in translation methodology, collaborative research techniques, and scholarly communication disappeared entirely along with the institution that had fostered and preserved these crucial intellectual traditions. Conservative estimates suggest that several 100,000 manuscripts were destroyed during the Mongol conquest of Baghdad, representing accumulated knowledge that can never be recovered or reconstructed. Unique translations of lost Greek philosophical and scientific works, original Islamic research treatises that had advanced human understanding in multiple fields, innovative literary masterpieces that had influenced cultural development across civilizations, and comprehensive reference works that had synthesized knowledge from multiple traditions all vanished completely in the systematic destruction. The true magnitude of the House of Wisdom's destruction can only be estimated rather than precisely calculated, since the very catalogs and inventories that would document what was lost were themselves destroyed in the conquest. However, fragmentary evidence preserved in other libraries suggests that the intellectual treasures consumed in Baghdad's fall may have included scientific and philosophical works that could have advanced human knowledge by centuries if they had survived to influence later scholarly development. Complete works by major Greek philosophers, known to modern scholarship only through brief fragments or later references by other authors, may have existed in perfect condition within the house's comprehensive collections. Advanced Arabic translations of lost Greek scientific treatises, sophisticated mathematical works that had pushed human understanding beyond anything preserved in European libraries, and detailed philosophical investigations that had explored questions not addressed elsewhere all likely vanished without trace in the systematic destruction. Original Islamic scholarship that had built upon this translated foundation represented equally valuable intellectual achievements that were lost forever. Revolutionary mathematical techniques, sophisticated scientific instruments whose principles wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries, and philosophical syntheses that had successfully reconciled competing intellectual traditions represented original contributions to human knowledge that disappeared so completely that we cannot even reconstruct what specific advances were lost. The destruction extended beyond individual texts and documents to encompass entire intellectual traditions and methodological approaches. The collaborative research techniques developed at the house, the systematic translation methodologies that had enabled its preservation work, and the international communication networks that have facilitated scholarly cooperation were all dependent on institutional continuity that was permanently severed by the Mongol conquest. Knowledge of how medieval Islamic scholars had conducted systematic research, organized collaborative investigations across cultural boundaries, and maintained quality control over their scholarly production vanished along with the institution itself. Not everything was completely lost in the catastrophic destruction. Some manuscripts have been copied and distributed to other libraries throughout the Islamic world, preserving portions of the house's collections in locations that escaped the immediate devastation. Individual scholars who survived the conquest carried with them personal memories of the house's methodologies and fragments of its accumulated knowledge. These scattered remnants, dispersed across time and geography, provide tantalizing glimpses of the extraordinary intellectual achievements that were lost while highlighting the magnitude of the permanent damage. European universities, which were just beginning to develop during the house's final centuries, had acquired some Islamic texts through trade relationships and military conquests in Spain and other border regions. The translations that reached European scholars, often transmitted through complex chains of Spanish and Italian intermediaries, preserve small portions of the house's intellectual legacy. These surviving fragments would eventually spark the European Renaissance and contribute significantly to the scientific revolution, suggesting the revolutionary potential of the complete collection that was lost forever. Islamic institutions in Spain, North Africa, and other regions that escaped Mongol conquest had maintained their own libraries and scholarly traditions that preserved some elements of the house's intellectual approaches. However, these surviving institutions were inevitably smaller in scope, less comprehensive in their collections, and increasingly isolated from each other as political fragmentation reduced opportunities for scholarly communication and collaboration. The unified international scholarly community that had characterized Islamic intellectual life during the house's golden age was never successfully restored. Individual scholars who had studied at the House of Wisdom or been significantly influenced by its methodologies continued their intellectual work in new locations throughout the Islamic world and beyond, carrying forward partial memories of its techniques and discoveries. Their subsequent contributions to Islamic, European, and other scholarly traditions provide indirect evidence of the house's extraordinary achievements, while simultaneously highlighting the magnitude of what was permanently lost when the institution itself was destroyed. The destruction of the House of Wisdom represents one of history's greatest intellectual disasters, yet remains largely unknown outside specialist academic circles focused on Islamic history or medieval science. This historical amnesia reflects both the thoroughness of the physical destruction and the subsequent development of historical narratives that systematically marginalized or ignored Islamic contributions to human intellectual development. European historical traditions, which came to dominate later scholarly narratives about medieval intellectual history, tended to emphasize direct inheritance of Greek and Roman learning while minimizing or ignoring the crucial role that Islamic preservation and innovation had played in maintaining and advancing human knowledge. The House of Wisdom's contributions were frequently reframed as mere translation and transmission work rather than original scholarship, systematically obscuring the magnitude of the loss that occurred when the institution was destroyed. The political fragmentation of the Islamic world following the Mongol conquests meant that no unified Islamic historiographical tradition developed with the resources and perspective necessary to preserve comprehensive memories of the house's achievements. Later Islamic scholars, working in smaller regional institutions with limited resources, lacked the broad historical perspective necessary to fully appreciate what had been lost. The institutional memory that might have preserved detailed accounts of the house's intellectual work was itself destroyed along with the institution and its scholarly community. Modern archaeological investigation of the House of Wisdom's original location has been severely limited by Baghdad's continuous occupation and the political instability that has characterized the region for much of the modern period. Unlike other ancient sites that can be systematically excavated to recover information about their historical development, the house's location cannot be thoroughly investigated, and the manuscripts that might preserve detailed contemporary accounts of its operations remain scattered in private collections and often inaccessible libraries throughout the world. The destruction of the House of Wisdom represented far more than the simple elimination of medieval manuscripts and historical documents. It permanently severed intellectual traditions and methodological approaches that could have continued developing and contributing to human knowledge for centuries if institutional continuity had been preserved. The scientific methodologies pioneered at the House, the philosophical syntheses achieved by its scholars, and the collaborative research practices that had made its achievements possible all disappeared completely with the institution itself. Contemporary science and philosophy might have developed along fundamentally different trajectories if the House's intellectual traditions had survived to influence later scholarly development. The advanced mathematical techniques developed there were centuries ahead of anything available in medieval European scholarship, suggesting that mathematical progress could have proceeded much more rapidly with continued Islamic institutional support. The systematic experimental methods employed in the House's medical and chemical research had established scientific approaches that anticipated modern scientific methodology by several centuries. The philosophical synthesis attempted at the House, which had sought to reconcile rational philosophical inquiry with religious faith, across multiple cultural boundaries, addressed fundamental intellectual problems that continue to challenge modern thinkers. The methodological approaches developed there might have provided conceptual frameworks for intellectual development that could have prevented or significantly mitigated the destructive conflicts between scientific and religious worldviews that would later characterize European intellectual history. Perhaps most significantly for the long-term development of human civilization, the House had represented a successful model of international intellectual cooperation that transcended political, cultural, and religious boundaries through shared commitment to knowledge and rational inquiry. Its destruction eliminated not just specific accumulated knowledge, but an entire institutional framework for collaborative scholarship that wouldn't be recreated anywhere in the world until the development of modern international scientific institutions. The House of Wisdom's destruction created a profound silence in human intellectual history, a gap where centuries of accumulated knowledge, innovative research methodologies, and collaborative, scholarly investigation simply vanished from the historical record. This represented far more than the loss of old books or historical curiosities. It constituted the elimination of an entire approach to human knowledge that might have led civilization along completely different developmental paths. The scholars who had worked in those halls, debating fundamental questions in multiple languages while advancing every field of human knowledge through systematic investigation and cross-cultural collaboration, represented intellectual possibilities that were permanently foreclosed by the Mongol conquest. Their innovative methodologies, their groundbreaking discoveries, and their vision of scholarship as a universal human enterprise transcending political and cultural boundaries died with them, leaving only scattered fragments and indirect influences that merely hint at what might have been achieved. The true tragedy extends beyond what we know was lost to encompass what we can never know was lost. Entire fields of scientific and philosophical inquiry, innovative approaches to persistent intellectual problems, and comprehensive syntheses of knowledge that could have fundamentally advanced human understanding all disappeared so completely that we cannot even imagine what specific achievements might have been possible if the institutional framework had survived to support continued intellectual development. In contemplating the silence where those voices once engaged in passionate intellectual debate, we can only wonder what alternative paths human knowledge might have followed, what different heights of understanding might have been achieved, and what fundamentally different world might have emerged if the greatest center of learning in human history had survived to continue its extraordinary work of preservation, innovation, and intellectual synthesis across the boundaries that divide human cultures and civilizations. From the profound silence left by Baghdad's lost wisdom, we turn now to a very different kind of confinement, one that glittered with gold and resonated with music, yet proved no less constraining than the humblest dungeon. As dawn breaks over the most magnificent palace in Europe, its first rays catch the countless surfaces of gold leaf that decorate every visible element of the Hall of Mirrors. In elaborately carved beds draped with silk that costs more than most families might earn in several lifetimes, the greatest nobles of France begin their carefully choreographed awakening. Yet do not mistake their immense wealth for genuine freedom, their extraordinary luxury for authentic happiness, or their exalted social privilege for meaningful power. Welcome to Versailles during the reign of Louis XIV, where the French aristocracy would discover that the most beautiful prison in human history was nonetheless a prison, one where every gesture required careful calculation, every word faced potential surveillance, and every moment of existence became a performance in an elaborate theater from which there could be no escape. Here, in chambers that blazed with more candlelight during a single evening's entertainment than entire villages might burn throughout a year, the cream of French society found themselves trapped within a system of magnificent servitude that would have been recognizable to any student of human bondage. They possessed ancient titles stretching back through centuries of noble lineage, owned vast estates scattered across the French countryside, and commanded the daily labor of thousands of peasants and servants. Yet they could not choose the hour of their awakening, the nature of their dress, or even the timing of their speech without first consulting the elaborate protocols that governed every instant of their pampered yet constrained existence. Your day begins at precisely 7 in the morning, not because you have chosen this hour for personal reasons, but because His Most Christian Majesty rises at 7, and your entire existence has become synchronized to the rhythms of royal routine. As a duke of sufficient social rank to merit inclusion among the court's inner circles, you possess the extraordinary privilege of attending the king's lever, that most sacred of daily ceremonies that transforms the basic human necessity of awakening into an elaborate courtly ritual of submission and hierarchy. You must arrive in the royal antechamber at the precisely appointed time, dressed in clothing whose cost would support a prosperous merchant family for an entire year. Your coat represents a masterpiece of silk brocade embroidered with genuine gold thread that catches and reflects the morning light. Your stockings are woven from the finest silk available in European markets. Your shoes feature diamond buckles whose value could purchase substantial rural properties. Every element of your elaborate costume has been carefully chosen to communicate your exact social rank, your considerable personal wealth, and most importantly, your complete submission to royal authority. For a single misplaced ribbon or improperly tied cravat could precipitate social disaster from which recovery might prove impossible. The sacred ritual begins when the first gentleman of the bedchamber draws back the heavy curtains that surround the royal bed with movements that have been refined through generations of identical performance. You bow with mathematical precision, exactly 18 degrees, neither 17 nor 19, as His Majesty's eyes open to greet another day of absolute sovereignty. The Grand Master of the Wardrobe approaches bearing a freshly laundered shirt, but court protocol prevents him from dressing the king directly. Instead, he must hand the garment to the Duke of Orleans, who passes it ceremonially to the Dauphin, who finally presents it to the royal person with appropriate reverence. You witness this elaborate choreography of servitude while maintaining perfect posture and an expression of devoted attention that must never waver regardless of fatigue, discomfort, or personal concerns. Your privilege extends to observing the king washing his hands in a golden basin crafted by the finest artisans in Europe, but you must never look directly at the royal countenance unless His Majesty addresses you specifically. The chief physician examines evidence of the royal digestion from the previous evening and pronounces his learned judgment on His Majesty's health. The master of the hunt describes the day's planned outdoor activities in language carefully chosen to emphasize royal pleasure rather than mere recreation. Every word spoken during this ceremony has been precisely chosen. Every gesture calculated with mathematical precision to reinforce the divine nature of royal authority and the blessed privilege of those permitted to witness it. You are not simply observing a man getting dressed. You are participating in a daily sacrament that transforms ordinary human activities into expressions of cosmic hierarchy and divine appointment. Once the lever concludes with appropriate ceremony, your day becomes an endless navigation of the most complex social hierarchy ever devised by human ingenuity and sustained by collective agreement. Every interaction throughout your waking hours is governed by precise rules that determine who speaks first in any conversation, who sits where during formal gatherings, and who acknowledges whom when paths cross in the palace's elaborate corridors. Your position in this intricate hierarchy depends not on intelligence, virtue, achievement, or any recognizable merit. It rests entirely on the antiquity of your family title and the current degree of royal favor you happen to enjoy. As a duke, you automatically outrank marquises, counts, and barons in all social situations. But you must yield precedence to princes of royal blood and visiting foreign royalty whose temporary presence disrupts normal social calculations. However, the system's complexity extends far beyond these simple rankings. A duke created by Louis XIII maintains precedence over a duke created by Louis XIV, even if the newer duke possesses vastly greater wealth and demonstrates superior capabilities. Your duchess wife can sit in the queen's presence while you must remain standing, creating domestic situations where your spouse enjoys privileges specifically denied to you. Seating arrangements at court functions require mathematical precision that would challenge professional geometricians. At formal dinners, your exact position at table communicates your current status to everyone present with unmistakable clarity. Sitting too close to His Majesty suggests inappropriate presumption that could be interpreted as dangerous ambition. Sitting too far from royal presence indicates declining favor that might signal political vulnerability. You must memorize the precise precedence relationships among hundreds of court nobles to avoid the social catastrophe of occupying someone else's rightful place. Even simple walking becomes a complex social performance fraught with potential disaster. When encountering other nobles in the palace's seemingly endless corridors, the elaborate rules governing who steps aside, who speaks first, and who acknowledges whom require constant mental calculation and perfect execution. A momentary lapse in protocol can result in formal duels, permanent social exile, or royal displeasure that could destroy your family's carefully cultivated position at court. Your immense wealth, accumulated over centuries through land ownership and royal grants, has paradoxically become the primary instrument of your imprisonment at Versailles. The king requires your presence at court as a demonstration of noble submission to royal authority. But court life demands expenditures that can financially destroy even the wealthiest families. Your costume alone requires thousands of livres annually, not from personal vanity, but from absolute necessity, since appearing at court in outdated or insufficient finery immediately signals declining fortune and leads inevitably to social death. Maintaining appropriate apartments at Versailles requires enormous, ongoing expense that stretches even great fortunes. The rooms themselves cost nothing since they are granted by royal favor, but furnishing them according to court standards demands constant expenditure that can never be deferred or reduced. You must employ dozens of servants, not because their services are actually needed, but because appearing with insufficient retinue suggests poverty and social decline. Your table must be lavishly supplied to maintain your reputation for appropriate hospitality. Every aspect of your lifestyle must constantly communicate wealth and status regardless of your actual financial situation or personal preferences. The gambling that dominates evening entertainments represents another carefully constructed financial trap that ensnares even the most prudent nobles. His Majesty expects nobles to participate enthusiastically in card games, where a single evening's losses can bankrupt entire families. Refusing to play suggests poverty and social inadequacy. Playing too conservatively indicates lack of proper aristocratic spirit and contempt for courtly values. You must regularly wager sums you cannot afford to lose while maintaining perfect composure and casual indifference to potentially catastrophic financial stakes. Your ancestral estates, which theoretically provide the income supporting this extravagant lifestyle, inevitably suffer from your enforced absence at court. Without direct personal supervision, estate managers embezzle funds, tenants default on their obligations, and necessary improvements are neglected or poorly executed. The wealth that enables your participation in court life is simultaneously being systematically destroyed by the social and financial demands of that very participation, creating a downward spiral that traps noble families in cycles of increasing debt and dependence. Your morning toilette transforms the fundamentally simple act of getting dressed into an elaborate social ritual that consumes multiple hours and requires the coordinated efforts of several skilled servants. Every element of your appearance must communicate specific information about your social status, personal wealth, and current relationship to royal power with perfect accuracy. Choosing inappropriate colors, inferior fabrics, or outdated accessories can produce social consequences lasting for months and affecting your entire family's core position. Your elaborate wig alone requires more than an hour of careful preparation by a skilled servant who arranges the complex curls according to the latest court fashion with mathematical precision. The powder that whitens, it contains expensive ingredients imported from across Europe at considerable cost. The silk ribbons that secure it must match your coat perfectly, and their quality must be immediately evident to casual observers. A poorly dressed wig signals declining fortune or, far worse, provincial origins that mark you as unworthy of serious court consideration. Your coat demands equally meticulous attention to every detail of cut, fabric, and ornamentation. The tailoring must be absolutely perfect, reflecting the latest Parisian fashion as interpreted through the lens of court protocol and royal preference. The fabric must be rich enough to demonstrate your wealth unmistakably, but not so ostentatious as to suggest involvement in trade or commerce. The embroidery must be current and fashionable, but never innovative, since novelty in dress can be as politically dangerous as novelty in other areas of court life. Even your undergarments must meet rigorous court standards that extend to items never visible to observers. Your shirt must be crafted from the finest linen available in European markets, with lace cuffs whose cost exceeds a working man's annual wages. Your silk stockings must be perfect, without runs, repairs, or any signs of economy. Your shoes must be handcrafted by the most expensive cobblers available and maintained in perfect condition despite the muddy palace courtyards you must traverse daily. Every conversation at Versailles takes place under constant surveillance, forcing you to develop sophisticated methods of indirect communication that allow genuine interaction while maintaining the appearance of perfect submission to royal authority. The conversational skills required for successful court life prove as complex as any diplomatic negotiation and far more dangerous, since a misinterpreted phrase or inappropriate gesture can destroy a lifetime's accumulated social position within hours. Direct statements about politics, religion, or royal policy remain absolutely impossible in any court context. Instead, you must master intricate arts of suggestion, innuendo, and carefully coded reference that allow meaning to be conveyed to sophisticated listeners while maintaining complete deniability if questioned by authorities. When discussing military campaigns, you cannot directly criticize royal strategy, but subtle emphasis on particular words, carefully timed pauses, or specific literary references can communicate your true opinions to those educated enough to decode such signals. Your facial expressions require constant conscious control that becomes exhausting after years of practice. A momentary look of skepticism during a royal pronouncement could be interpreted as seditious criticism of divine authority. An inappropriate smile suggests lack of proper seriousness about matters of state. Even your posture communicates political messages. Slouching indicates disrespect for royal presence, while excessive rigidity might suggest fear or, worse, mockery of court protocols. The elaborate fan language developed by court ladies extends into masculine equivalents involving snuff boxes, gloves, and handkerchiefs that allow complex conversations to take place in full view of royal surveillance without verbal detection. These silent communications permit sophisticated discussions of sensitive topics, but the consequences of misinterpretation prove severe. What you intend as friendly social interest might be perceived as romantic advance, political conspiracy, or worse. Versailles contains more than 2,000 individual rooms, and your access to each depends entirely on your exact position in the court hierarchy, creating architectural segregation that physically manifests social stratification. Understanding these invisible boundaries proves crucial for social survival, while violating them results in immediate social catastrophe that can destroy generations of family advancement at court. The king's private apartments represent the sacred center of this elaborate universe, with access depending on your court position, the time of day, and the specific royal activities taking place. Even nobles of high rank find themselves excluded from certain chambers during particular ceremonies. The antechambers surrounding royal apartments create carefully graduated levels of privilege. Those permitted in outer rooms during public audiences might be permanently barred from inner chambers during private consultations. The magnificent Hall of Mirrors serves as a public corridor where social hierarchies are constantly displayed through carefully choreographed movement and interaction. Your walking pace, the route you choose, and the people you acknowledge all communicate detailed information about your current status and political alignments to anyone observing. Avoiding certain individuals suggests declining favor or political conflict. Approaching others too eagerly indicates desperation or social climbing. Even the palace gardens follow strict protocols that govern every aspect of outdoor recreation and social interaction. Certain paths are reserved exclusively for royal use. Others indicate your social position through their proximity to the palace itself. The elaborate groves and fountain areas provide venues for seemingly private conversation, but each location carries its own associations and potential dangers. Meeting in inappropriate places at wrong times can suggest conspiracies that don't actually exist, while failing to appear in expected locations indicates declining influence or court disfavor. Dining at Versailles transforms the basic human necessity of eating into elaborate theatrical performances that reinforce social hierarchy while providing opportunities for subtle political maneuvering. Every meal follows complex protocols governing not merely what you eat, but how you consume it, with whom you dine, and what conversations are permitted during each course. His Majesty's public meals represent the ultimate expression of dining as political theater. We are privileged to witness royal consumption communicates your importance to the entire court community. Standing motionless for hours while observing the king eat demonstrates your devotion, while providing opportunities to study his health, mood, and reactions to various courtiers' presence. The elaborate dishes served reflect the abundance and sophistication of royal domains, but you are not dining. You are participating in a ritual that transforms consumption into worship. Your own meals require equally careful orchestration of every detail. The servants you employ, the dishes you serve, and the guests you invite all communicate specific information about your wealth, taste, and current political connections. Serving outdated delicacies suggests declining fortune. Introducing novel dishes might indicate dangerous innovation or inappropriate foreign influence. Conversations permitted at your table must carefully balance entertainment with discretion, sophistication with absolute loyalty to established authority. The elaborate etiquette governing which utensils to use, how to hold them properly, and when to employ specialized serving pieces creates constant opportunities for social disaster. Provincial nobles who lack proper training in court dining rituals immediately reveal their inadequate backgrounds through clumsy handling of ceremonial serving equipment or inappropriate responses to formal toasts and elaborate ceremonial presentations. Fashion at Versailles operates as a complex communication system where every element of your appearance conveys specific information about your status, wealth, political allegiances, and relationship to royal favor. This extends far beyond personal vanity. Your clothing choices can enhance or completely destroy your social position, making fashion literacy an essential survival skill for anyone attempting to navigate court life successfully. The colors you wear communicate political allegiances and personal relationships with unmistakable clarity. Wearing specific color combinations might suggest support for particular court factions or inappropriate romantic interests. His Majesty's personal preferences in color influence the entire court's wardrobe choices, but following royal fashion too obviously suggests sycophancy, while ignoring it indicates disrespect or dangerous independence. Fabric choices require equally careful consideration of multiple complex factors. Silk demonstrates wealth and sophistication, but specific patterns and weaving techniques indicate your access to the most exclusive merchants and suppliers. Wearing fabrics that are too common suggests declining fortune. Choosing materials that are too exotic might indicate inappropriate connections to foreign powers or commercial interests that compromise noble dignity. Jewelry serves as portable wealth that must be displayed with perfect appropriateness to social context. Too little suggests poverty and social decline. Too much indicates either nouveau riche origins or desperate attempts to impress observers. The specific pieces you choose must complement your outfit, while avoiding any suggestion of inappropriate wealth sources or questionable taste. Ancient family jewels carry messages about lineage and tradition, while newly acquired pieces suggest either rising fortune or recent royal favor. Court life at Versailles demands mastery of political intrigue, rivaling the most complex international diplomatic negotiations. Every conversation contains multiple levels of meaning that must be carefully decoded. Every alliance carries hidden dangers that could prove fatal, and every friendship might conceal traps designed to destroy unwary participants. Success depends entirely on your ability to navigate these treacherous social waters while maintaining perfect composure and apparent innocence. The political factions that dominate court society shift constantly based on royal favor, family connections, and external political developments that can transform allies into enemies overnight. Today's trusted confidant might become tomorrow's bitter enemy if circumstances change their position relative to royal preferences. You must continuously monitor these shifting allegiances while positioning yourself to benefit from changes in fortune without appearing opportunistic or disloyal to current associations. Information becomes the most valuable currency in this rarefied atmosphere where knowledge of royal preferences, upcoming appointments, or planned policy changes can provide enormous advantages if used skillfully. However, possessing such information creates serious dangers. Being suspected of espionage or rumor spreading can result in permanent exile from court. Your correspondence faces monitoring. Your conversations are routinely reported, and your visitors are carefully noted by the extensive network of informers that keeps His Majesty informed about all court activities. The entertainment that fills your days at Versailles appears magnificent and varied, but actually functions as another sophisticated form of control that prevents independent thought or action. The constant round of elaborate ceremonies, musical concerts, formal balls, and theatrical performances consumes all available time and energy while providing His Majesty with regular opportunities to observe your behavior and assess your loyalty to established authority. The gambling that dominates evening entertainment serves multiple functions beyond simple amusement. The enormous financial stakes demonstrate aristocratic indifference to money while creating dependencies that enhance royal control over noble families. Your gambling debts might be forgiven through royal generosity, creating personal obligations that bind you more tightly to the court system and royal favor. Theatrical performances require your attendance and appropriate responses that demonstrate proper appreciation for royal cultural patronage. Showing insufficient enthusiasm for court spectacles suggests political disloyalty. Displaying excessive interest in particular themes or characters might indicate dangerous political sympathies or inappropriate intellectual independence. The elaborate hunting expeditions that provide outdoor recreation follow detailed protocols that constantly reinforce social hierarchy through every aspect of participation. Your position in hunting parties, the weapons you're permitted to carry, and the game you're allowed to pursue all reflect your exact social status. These expeditions provide rare opportunities for private conversation with fellow nobles, but the informal atmosphere creates new dangers of inappropriate intimacy or careless comments that could be reported to authorities. The most insidious aspect of your life at Versailles lies in how the system creates compelling illusions of choice while actually eliminating all meaningful freedom. You can select daily activities from an elaborate menu of court entertainments. Choose clothing from vast wardrobes filled with magnificent options, and decide which social functions deserve your attendance. Yet all these apparent choices occur within parameters so restrictive that they amount to no genuine choice whatsoever. Your daily schedule appears flexible, but actually follows rigid patterns determined by royal routines and court customs that cannot be violated without serious consequences. You can choose to attend morning mass or evening entertainments, but avoiding either suggests religious indifference or antisocial behavior that could destroy your carefully cultivated reputation. The activities available to you are predetermined by your rank, gender, and current favor status in ways that eliminate genuine personal preference. Even your private thoughts gradually become subject to court discipline through constant surveillance and the slow internalization of court values that occurs after years of this existence. You begin thinking automatically in terms of protocol and precedence even during solitary moments. Your judgments about people, situations, and abstract ideas become unconsciously filtered through considerations of court hierarchy and royal approval that shape your mental processes in fundamental ways. The friendships you develop at court prove simultaneously genuine and calculated in ways that create constant internal tension. You develop real affection for fellow courtiers while remaining constantly aware of how these relationships serve your political and social interests. The emotional bonds that should provide relief from systematic pressures instead become additional sources of anxiety and obligation that complicate rather than simplify your daily existence. Living in the most beautiful palace in Europe requires personal sacrifices that extend far beyond financial expense or social inconvenience. The magnificent surroundings that should enhance your life instead become the elaborate backdrop for an existence so thoroughly constrained that every moment is predetermined by forces entirely beyond your control. The luxury that surrounds you serves primarily to demonstrate your complete dependence on royal favor for everything that makes life worth living. Your apartments, furnished with the finest furniture and decorated with priceless artworks, are not truly yours in any meaningful sense. They exist at royal sufferance and can be withdrawn instantly if you fall from favor. The servants who attend you owe ultimate loyalty to His Majesty rather than to your family. Even your personal possessions exist at royal pleasure and can be confiscated immediately if circumstances change. The food you consume, the clothing you wear, and the entertainment you enjoy all depend entirely on maintaining your position within the court hierarchy through constant vigilance and perfect behavior. Lose royal favor, and you lose not merely political influence, but access to the lifestyle that has become your complete identity. You remain wealthy only as long as you accept enslavement to the system that provides and maintains that wealth. The knowledge and skills you develop at court prove completely useless in any other environment. You become expert in protocols, precedences, and court customs that have no value beyond Versailles walls. Your education in literature, music, and philosophy serves primarily to make you a more entertaining courtier rather than developing capabilities that could provide genuine independence or alternative life possibilities. Your year follows a rigid calendar of court events that eliminates personal choice while creating deceptive illusions of seasonal variety. Each season brings prescribed entertainments, social obligations, and limited opportunities, but apparent diversity masks fundamental repetition that characterizes your entire existence at court. Spring at Versailles means return of outdoor entertainments after winter's indoor confinement. Gardens reopen for formal promenades. Hunting expeditions resume their elaborate schedules, and outdoor theatrical performances begin their seasonal cycle. You participate in these activities not from personal interest or enjoyment, but because attendance is expected and absence would be noted as suspicious or antisocial behavior. Summer intensifies court activities through longer days that allow extended entertainments and more complex social interactions. Heat makes elaborate court dress increasingly uncomfortable, but relaxing clothing standards would suggest inappropriate informality. You endure significant physical discomfort while maintaining perfect composure, constantly demonstrating your commitment to court standards regardless of personal cost or physical suffering. Autumn brings the hunting season that dominates court life for months through elaborate expeditions and related social activities. Regardless of personal interest in hunting or outdoor sports, you must participate enthusiastically to maintain social position and demonstrate proper aristocratic values. The complex ceremonies surrounding hunts, detailed protocols governing participation, and extensive social obligations consume weeks of time in activities serving no personal purpose. Winter confines the court indoors, intensifying social pressures through closer proximity and reduced activity options. Gambling, theatrical performances, and elaborate dinners become more competitive and potentially dangerous as courtiers compete for limited royal attention during seasons when outdoor distractions are unavailable and social tensions inevitably increase. Your position at Versailles binds not only your own life, but your entire family to the court system in ways that make escape impossible for future generations. Your children must be raised as courtiers, educated in identical protocols and precedences that have governed your existence. They cannot choose different life paths without destroying the family's court position and abandoning the investments of multiple generations in court service and royal favor. Your sons must learn court political navigation from early childhood, developing skills necessary to maintain family position after your death. Their education focuses entirely on court customs, aristocratic accomplishments, and subtle arts of flattery and intrigue, rather than practical skills that might provide alternatives to court life. They become prisoners of identical systems that confine you, but with even less understanding of what alternative possibilities they have lost. Your daughters face even more restrictive futures since their marriage prospects depend entirely on court connections and royal approval of family alliances. They must be trained in elaborate protocols governing female court behavior while developing beauty, accomplishments, and social skills that will make them valuable marriage partners within the court system. Their entire lives will be determined by political calculations and social arrangements rather than personal preferences or individual talents. Family wealth that maintains your court position must be preserved for future generations, preventing its use to establish genuine independence. Your estates exist primarily to fund continued court participation rather than providing alternatives to court life. Each generation becomes more deeply embedded in the system as participation costs increase while alternatives steadily diminish. The court environment that should stimulate intellectual development through exposure to sophisticated conversation and artistic excellence instead creates mental constraints that systematically limit genuine thought and honest expression. Constant need to monitor your words, conform to orthodox opinions, and avoid controversial topics gradually erodes your capacity for independent intellectual exploration. Religious discussions must conform to royal preferences and official doctrine without exception. Political conversations cannot question fundamental assumptions about monarchy, aristocracy, or French cultural superiority. Even artistic preferences must align perfectly with court taste and royal patronage decisions. You develop elaborate mental habits of self-censorship that eventually make genuine intellectual exploration psychologically impossible. Books available in your library are selected for appropriateness rather than intellectual value or personal interest. Works that might encourage dangerous independent thinking are systematically excluded, while officially approved texts are promoted regardless of actual quality or relevance. Your reading becomes another form of performance designed to demonstrate orthodoxy rather than expand understanding or personal knowledge. Conversations with fellow courtiers follow identical constraints as everyone understands which topics are safe, which opinions are acceptable, and which ideas must never be expressed under any circumstances. Intellectual stimulation that should result from gathering educated people in sophisticated environments instead produces stultifying conformity that prevents genuine exchange of ideas or authentic intellectual development. Court life at Versailles imposes physical constraints that transform your body into another instrument of royal control and social hierarchy. Elaborate dress codes, prescribed postures, and ritualized movements required by court protocol gradually reshape your physical presence until even unconscious body language communicates submission to royal authority. Clothing required for court appearance restricts natural movement and requires constant attention to maintain properly throughout long social events. Your posture must remain formally erect regardless of fatigue, discomfort, or personal physical limitations. Gestures must be controlled and appropriate to avoid suggesting informality or disrespect for established protocols. Even facial expressions require continuous monitoring to ensure they communicate proper attitudes and emotional responses. Physical spaces of Versailles, despite their undeniable magnificence, are designed primarily for power display and hierarchy reinforcement rather than human comfort or practical living. Vast halls and ceremonial chambers create beautiful backdrops for court rituals, but provide little genuine space for relaxation, privacy, or informal human interaction. Your body must constantly adapt to environments designed for political spectacle rather than comfortable human habitation. Court diet, while luxurious in quality and presentation, follows rigid social protocols that may not meet your nutritional needs or respect personal preferences. You eat what is deemed appropriate to your social rank at times determined by court schedule, regardless of hunger, appetite, or individual dietary requirements. Your body's natural rhythms become completely subordinated to social requirements and ceremonial obligations. The most profound constraint imposed by court life may be the complete impossibility of authentic emotional expression in any social context. Every feeling must be carefully filtered through considerations of appropriateness, potential political consequences, and social positioning requirements. You develop elaborate internal systems for managing emotions that eventually make genuine feeling increasingly difficult to access or express. Love becomes primarily a political and social calculation rather than personal emotion or authentic human connection. Romantic interests must align with social position, family alliances, and current court politics. Marriage serves dynastic purposes and social advancement rather than personal happiness or emotional fulfillment. Even friendship must be constantly evaluated for political implications and social appropriateness rather than enjoyed for its own sake. Anger, regardless of its complete justification, cannot be expressed directly without risking immediate social disaster and potential exile from court. You must develop sophisticated psychological techniques for managing frustration while maintaining perfect courtesy and apparent contentment. The constant injustices and obvious absurdities of court life must be endured with apparent grace and good humor that conceals any genuine emotional responses. Sadness or melancholy suggest weakness or dissatisfaction with royal arrangements, both of which are interpreted as dangerous political attitudes. You must maintain cheerful composure regardless of personal losses, profound disappointments, or simple homesickness for ancestral estates and family traditions. Deaths of beloved family members, failure of personal hopes, or longing for authentic human connection must be hidden behind perfect court manners. Even genuine joy requires careful regulation and conscious control. Excessive enthusiasm might suggest lack of aristocratic sophistication. Insufficient appreciation indicates dangerous indifference to royal magnificence and court privileges. Your emotional responses must be continuously calibrated to communicate proper attitudes, while avoiding any suggestion of inappropriate feelings or independence. Religious life at Versailles serves political rather than spiritual purposes, transforming what should be your most personal relationship into another instrument of royal control and social manipulation. Faith becomes a matter of court protocol rather than genuine spiritual development, with every religious observance evaluated primarily for its political implications and social appropriateness. Attendance at court religious services is absolutely mandatory, but these elaborate ceremonies focus more on displaying proper social hierarchy than fostering genuine worship or spiritual growth. Your position during Mass, the appropriateness of your devotional behavior, and your responses to religious music are all carefully observed and evaluated for their demonstration of proper court attitudes and political loyalty. Private devotions must align perfectly with royal religious policies and court orthodoxy, without any personal variation. Books of hours, prayer practices, and spiritual advisors must all meet court standards and royal approval. Personal religious experiences that might suggest direct communication with divine authority could be interpreted as bypassing proper religious and political hierarchies, creating dangerous suspicions about your political reliability. Charitable activities, which should express genuine spiritual concern and Christian obligation, instead become opportunities to demonstrate wealth and appropriate social position. The causes you support, the methods you employ for giving, and the publicity your charity receives all communicate detailed information about your political loyalties and social attitudes to observant courtiers and royal informers. The magnificent artistic environment of Versailles should inspire creativity and aesthetic development, but instead creates another form of sophisticated confinement that limits authentic artistic expression and personal aesthetic response. Your relationship to art becomes entirely mediated through considerations of appropriateness, royal preference, and social positioning requirements that eliminate genuine aesthetic experience. Your patronage of artists must align perfectly with court taste and explicit royal approval. Supporting innovative or controversial artists could suggest dangerous independence of judgment or inappropriate intellectual curiosity. Your artistic preferences become matters of political loyalty rather than personal aesthetic response or genuine appreciation. Beautiful objects that surround you serve primarily to demonstrate your submission to official taste rather than provide authentic aesthetic pleasure. Participation in court entertainments requires you to perform appreciation for artistic works regardless of your genuine response or personal preferences. Your applause, comments, and expressions of enthusiasm are all evaluated for their appropriateness rather than their authenticity. You develop elaborate techniques for simulating aesthetic pleasure while your genuine artistic responses are systematically suppressed and eventually eliminated. Music, literature, and visual arts that fill your daily life are all chosen for their political and social appropriateness rather than their artistic merit or personal appeal. You are constantly surrounded by beauty, but it is beauty specifically designed to reinforce the very system that constrains you rather than to provide genuine aesthetic experience or personal inspiration. Even your health becomes subject to court protocol and royal oversight in ways that subordinate physical well-being to social and political requirements. Physical ailments that might interfere with court duties must be concealed or managed without disrupting social obligations. Your body's needs become completely subordinated to court life demands, creating health problems that cannot be properly addressed without serious social consequences. Physicians who attend you serve court interests as much as your personal health and medical needs. Medical treatments must be appropriate to your social position and must not interfere with court obligations or social appearances. Privacy about health matters proves impossible when your physical condition is continuously monitored for its political implications and social significance. Aging creates particular challenges as declining physical capabilities make court duties increasingly difficult, while social expectations remain completely unchanged. You must maintain perfect court behavior despite growing physical limitations, creating stress and discomfort that accelerate health decline while providing no accommodation for natural human frailty. Mental health problems prove particularly dangerous since they might be interpreted as dissatisfaction with court life or subtle criticism of royal arrangements. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological difficulties must be hidden behind perfect court manners regardless of their severity or their interference with daily functioning and social performance. The final irony of life at Versailles lies in how your magnificent imprisonment has gradually made you incapable of the freedom it systematically denies. After years of court life, you have lost the practical skills, independent knowledge, and psychological flexibility necessary for autonomous existence. This prison has become not merely your constraint, but your complete identity, making escape impossible even if doors were suddenly opened. Your education has prepared you for nothing beyond court life and its highly specialized requirements. Your skills prove completely useless outside palace walls. Your wealth depends entirely on maintaining court position through constant performance. Your social connections exist only within the court system. Your very sense of self has become so thoroughly integrated with your role as courtier that you can no longer imagine any other form of existence or alternative life possibility. The world outside Versailles has become foreign and genuinely threatening through years of complete separation. You have lost touch with practical skills necessary for managing estates, conducting business, or functioning in environments that don't operate according to court protocol. Your refinement has become a disability that prevents adaptation to less rarefied circumstances or independent decision-making. Most profoundly, you have lost the psychological capacity for making genuinely independent choices about any significant life matter. After years of having every decision mediated through considerations of court appropriateness, you can no longer distinguish between what you actually desire and what the system requires you to want. Your personal desires have become completely indistinguishable from your social obligations and political necessities. Life at Versailles represents perhaps history's most sophisticated form of human control, a comprehensive system that imprisoned people through luxury rather than force, through privilege rather than punishment, through inclusion rather than exclusion. The French aristocracy became willing participants in their own systematic subjugation because the system that enslaved them also provided everything they'd been taught to value and desire. The palace that dazzled all of Europe with its unprecedented magnificence functioned ultimately as an elaborate machine for transforming independent nobles into dependent courtiers, free citizens into willing slaves, autonomous individuals into interchangeable performers in a theater of power from which there could be no escape. The beauty that surrounded courtiers, the luxury they enjoyed daily, and the privileges they cherished all served to disguise the fundamental reality that they had traded their basic humanity for carefully assigned places in a system that valued them solely for their perfect submission. Your life at Versailles proves conclusively that the most effective prisons are those that convince inmates they are privileged rather than confined, chosen rather than captured, free rather than enslaved. When chains are crafted from gold and bars are disguised as art, when guards wear silk and wardens speak in honeyed phrases of respect and honor, imprisonment becomes not merely tolerable, but actively desirable. Until that moment when you realize that the door you believed led toward freedom actually opens only onto a more beautiful cell. In the end, you discover yourself trapped not by walls or weapons, but by the very magnificence that was supposed to represent your elevated status and social triumph. The palace of your dreams has become the prison of your daily reality, and the luxury that should have been your reward has become the instrument of your permanent servitude to forces beyond your control or even your understanding.